At 6:30, gang. Good evening and welcome to the Tuesday, September 5th, 2017 regularly scheduled meeting of the Marquette Township Board. If you would join us in the pledge, we'll start the meeting. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So, roll call, Randy, please.
Trustee LaRue,
Here.
Trustee Everson,
Here.
Trustee Wiegand,
Here.
Trustee Marks,
Present.
Treasurer Johnson,
Here.
Clerk Attar is here, and Supervisor Durant.
Here.
Staff present is Manager Gerard and Township Attorney Roger Zappa.
Thanks, Randy. So all of our phones are off and our microphones are on. Looks good. We're ready to do some business. Any public comment? Anybody going once, going twice? No public comment. All right, I'm going to talk just for a couple minutes about our new agenda. It is a little overwhelming before we get into it, just so we kind of know. We'll take it a little bit at a time, but I just wanted to give you an overview. We've melded a couple different things. We've kind of taken the template and added what we're going to talk about tonight, so it's a little more cumbersome than it will be. You can see we've got a lot of stuff in the consent agenda. I expect that most of our business will be in there. We do have a spot on the agenda that we can pull things out. So if there's any time you see something in here that you want to discuss or have questions, you need answers, down in pulled items from the consent agenda is number 9. So when we go to approve the consent agenda, if you want to pull something out, we'll stick it in that spot. Just let me know when we go to approve it. That's the first thing I wanted to mention. Then we've got the approval of the regular agenda. Board education and privilege comment is the kind of thing like Sarah Cambenzi when she came, Tom Curry when they were running for office. If we have someone maybe from the library or someone who wants to have information for the board, that's where that's going to fall, in any kind of privilege comment. Community linkage is, we don't have anything with that yet. We'll be doing a calendar for the whole year while we're working on budget, and then in that fourth quarter, we'll start putting our calendar together. Susan will help me with that. It's going to be based on what we think we need to take care of next year. So the agenda will be a little more set once we have that plan of work, that annual plan of work. So for right now, we're not going to even be using that. Well, I left it on so that you'd be able to see it, where it's going to be. In this case tonight, we do have 2 items we're going to talk about. Those would be regular agenda items. The road commission letter, and Jason's going to give us a project update on the underpass or tunnel, whichever you want to call it. And then the other 2 items that would fall under community linkage would be board member comment. We'll have an opportunity to comment on what we're hearing from the public. Anytime someone gives you a call, you get an email, somebody stops you at the store, and there's something you want to share, a concern, an issue, something we need to give to staff, or something we need to, put on a future agenda, we're going to talk about it in there. I've got a couple things I want to throw at you tonight myself, and you're welcome to add anything to that tonight. And then again, the community survey, we don't have an annual plan yet, so those are the things that will be on the agenda, like placeholders. That's kind of what Susan called them, was placeholders. Policy discussion tonight. In this case, it's going to be the policy manual. We'll talk about that, whether we're going to approve it or not. And then pulled items from the agenda. That's what if we don't have anything, we'll skip over that. The staff reports, right now we're getting Public Works and Fire. I would like to request that we consider adding the planning and assessing departments. I really haven't talked to Jason too much, but I did talk to Dulcie. She's willing to come once a month, just like everybody else. If she can't make it, She can give us a quick blurb on what's happening with the tribunal and anything in the financial department. She and Ernie are talking all the time. And then I want to talk tonight about committees a little bit more. I keep bringing this up, but I would like a little more definitive support here on that. We'll talk about that. Ends and executive limitations. We won't start our monitoring yet because we don't have anything to monitor, for one thing. But Randy Rattari and I were talking, and we're thinking maybe January 1st would be a good time to start. That gives staff the last quarter of this year to kind of start. We can start the process of reporting and seeing what's necessary to move forward into our annual plan of work. So I can coordinate with Randy on that. Same thing with the board self-assessment. And the public, of course, has another opportunity to speak. And then the wrap-up I like because we can, talk about any announcements we want to share. Randy can review the motions and anything that, anybody that was assigned something to do, if there's anything. And then anything that's going to go on future agendas. This is a good time for us to put that agenda together. It isn't, I've told you guys before, it's not just what the Randys and I put together. If you have things you want to bring up, just let us know. There's a form in the policy book. Just submit it, only because it's for clarity. You can make a copy, or we'll have copies in the front office, and if there's something you want to add, just let us know. And then we have another board member comment. So the first, I forgot to mention, the first board member comment is kind of still designed to be in response to what the public is saying at the podium. And that was the original intent, as far as I understand the way our agenda was put together years ago. And we use that sometimes for announcements and everything else. And that's okay, but this is a little bit more structured. So the people at the podium know that if we're going to say something, we don't have to. That's when it would be addressed. So it's just a little more structured for the public too. So next time, again, this agenda will look a little more shaved down. We won't have as much quite on here. So with that being said, we have no public, so we don't have any board member comment right now. We would look for approval of the consent agenda unless somebody wants to pull something out.
Where we just talk about something, I don't really want to pull anything out. Just a few comments and a couple items in
That's when you take it out so you can discuss it.
If you want to take it out, that's fine. Especially since we're kind of starting this, we kind of have to figure out.
The one comment would be on the Market Area Wastewater Treatment Facility.
Okay, let's pull that out. Let's pull it out, and then we'll do our approvals.
The other one is
wastewater management.
the other one would be the Charter Communication franchise fee.
3A.
5A and 3A.
What I was looking for was the numbers. 3A,
3A and 5A.
5A. Okay, excellent.
I'll make a motion, we approve the consent agenda as amended with 3A and 5A excluded.
Second.
Okay, motion and support. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
One comment though, Lynn, if we are going to put the budget amendments into the consent agenda. We don't have one this month, but if we do, our consent agenda will be a roll call vote. So it covers that budget amendment. It doesn't have to be this time, so we don't have one, but if we have a budget amendment, it will be a roll call vote.
Will you comment like you have in the past on it then too?
I will, I can. Well, it's in the packet, but I can still read it.
That makes sense? Okay. All right, then I just need approval of the rest of the agenda.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Okay, and we don't have any declarations of any conflicts of interest on anything on tonight's agenda, I'm assuming? Just thought I'd mention that since that was part of it. And we have no board education or privilege comment tonight, so we can bypass that. Community linkage. Our first item tonight is going to be to discuss the Marquette County Road Commission letter. So this was in my personal mailbox at home, and as I researched a little bit, I found out that I believe every board member got it addressed to their own home address. This is in response to the request that we made to have a joint meeting with the Marquette Township Board and the Marquette County Road Commission Board. They're 5 members and our 7. And then staff, of course, and like our managers, directors. I was a little bit kind of kicked in the gut, I think, from you. I gave you my questions, what we talked about. It was just the 4 of us in the meeting, Randy and me, with Jim Iwaniki and the Road Commission Chair, Ray Roberts. And there were roughly 8 topics we talked about. These are their responses. You saw where 2 of them, they said nothing, budget-wise. So what I was hoping for, and I think Randy too, was that we could have a discussion about the roads, what the funding's like, what can we do to help. I asked some suggestions about working with the drain commissioner. I talked about grants, or what can we do in Lansing? Is there something we can help facilitate to make the whole road issue, whether it's plowing or gravel or water or whatever it is, more seamless and more workable? And basically they said, we don't think we want to meet with you. We just, if you want to have the staff talk to your board, that's fine. So, I don't know. I'm hoping you're going to give me some more muscle. Pete?
Is there anything written out that their responsibilities to us? And after reading some of this, I think about after the 3rd question or 4th, I would have got up and walked over to you, wasting your time. That's what I would have done.
But I wanted to get into the meat of it. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
but
just
it's just-
stopping at the money.
Until they're
was not-
serious about it.
Well, we thought they were.
Yeah, well,
I did, and I think Randy did. I'm not
you
speaking
get more
for him.
sense out of a
but
bunch of grade school kids with the answers they give you.
I came out I felt really good about the whole conversation. They
I
took
was very
a lot
disappointed
of notes.
in that.
I was too. Randy, do you want to comment?
Well, I thought during the discussion, I thought our discussion went very well, and we got a lot of things on the table, and there was some good back and forth discussion, and I was really surprised when I didn't get a copy of the letter, but when I saw a copy of the letter, I was surprised at the position that was taken, and I'm not sure they understand what it is that we were suggesting. What we were suggesting is we've never really had a sit-down discussion between the governing body of the township and the governing body of the road commission to talk about expectations and issues and abilities, basically. And that's what we thought we were going to be getting a response from, and I'm not sure that they really got that message, because it sounds like they discussed it at their board, and either they're not used to meeting with other governing bodies, or they decided that they wanted to have staff bring the information back to them, which really doesn't make sense to have this board talking to their staff and as a go-between. So, yeah, what we were hoping for was like you do with the business association and like you do with the planning commission on a quarterly basis, was to have a sit-down face-to-face with their entire board and our entire board, so you can have some good communication back and forth and understand where each other is, and have some frank discussions about what the expectations are in both directions. But that message apparently didn't get transmitted well.
Any other comments, or Bernie?
In reading through the questions and that, and one thing, you brought up the upcharge for doing the work. We have to pay 17% on
We
the
have
work
been.
we've done?
No, not the work that we've done. Work that we have, that we request the road commission to do. They charge an administrative fee of 17% to cover their staff time and their work on our behalf on a specific project other than strictly road maintenance. If we ask them to do the engineering for a project, let's say, like we did on Werner Street, they basically then charge for the time that they spend being the oversight of the engineering and the bidding, that kind of thing. When they put out proposals for the crack sealing on the roads, if we participate in that, there's a 17% administrative fee on top of the cost of the project.
Do they do that with the state also? Or is that just,
I guess I don't know the answer to that question, but I know we're a 60% reimbursement for work that they do for us, and the state is an 80% reimbursement, and then the feds are 100% reimbursement. So I don't think they charge I don't think they charge the feds anything because they're getting 100% reimbursement of their costs. I'm not sure about the state.
Dave?
I would think the place to start with this, and obviously everybody's a little disappointed in the way that went. I would think the way to start with this and get some kind of a dialogue going, whether it's good or bad, is to return the favor and send them a rather strongly worded letter that expresses our disappointment and restate our questions. And again, ask for a meeting. I don't think they've had anybody ever ask for this, and I
Yeah,
don't think
that's
they
what
know
I'm
how to
thinking, too.
respond to it.
Yeah.
And they've never really been, from what I can see, accountable to anybody as far as explaining what they do. It's just what they do because that's what they do. I think we're well within our rights to return the favor and send them a strongly worded letter.
Lynn?
Yes.
Have you met with Bill Lutzo on this at all? I mean, Bill is a very easygoing, understanding person, and I think if, I like Dave's idea, and I think if that's the case, then I think we should send letters to all of their members, rather than just the couple that you met with.
The same way we did, or they did? Okay. Yeah, in this case, he's just a board member, so,
He's vice chair, I believe.
yeah. But I mean, he's
he's
still one of 5, so not that I couldn't contact him, but it would be not as effective.
well. I think if we involved him with it, as well as all the rest of
Yeah,
them.
absolutely.
Just knowing Bill and how he operates, this is not like his operation whatsoever.
Yeah.
It's just not Bill, so
Yeah.
that's why I'd like to see something go to him so he knows what's going on also, and I can follow up with it with him too, or I know him, so
Yeah,
he's a good person.
okay. John, did you have something?
Yeah, I would ask us to walk a little carefully here. I agree with the comments made that this is an unfamiliar gesture that we've made with this board, the board at the county. And I think rather than emphasize a strong response, I would emphasize about as clear communication as we could send, indicating what our intentions really are and what our goal is. But I would be hesitant to do anything in a strong way. The point is that I think Dave's comment is right. They may never have been asked to do this. And so rather than get off carelessly onto the wrong set of relations with them, I would urge our communication to be crafted in such a way that we once again emphasize what our goals are, what our intent was, and try to be as diplomatic as possible at least one more time. And I think we can gain a lot more with that. And I do agree that sending a copy to all members, once we get that communication crafted, send it to all their board members. And make sure that their staff gets a copy of it as well.
Even though ours didn't.
I think we can get a little further with that than I understand the urge to let them know that they have some obligation to us, and they have a greater obligation, obviously, because we've gone out of our way to tax our citizens to do something that they should be doing. Now that's our background, but I urge some diplomacy.
Is there anything anybody wants to ask them? Is there something specific that you'd like to know or tell them, just so I don't miss anything? Anything that's irritating you, Dave?
I would just agree with John on that. It's necessary that they get a clear
So-
explanation of what we intend and that we don't intend we don't want to do it through their staff, and why we want to meet with their board and restate it the way it was intended, and I don't think they understand.
Yeah, that's my first impression too, and that they've never done this before. Randy?
I would just suggest that, that we approach it from the standpoint that the road commission by statute is our DPW. I mean, they are our road agency, and we're simply asking to meet with our department, basically, is what the board is saying. We want to sit down so we understand clearly on each side what's realistic, what's not realistic, and have a plan going forward so we're not either party's in the dark.
Okay. Ernie?
I think also they may be looking down the road too, because there's millages coming up on Chocolate roads and Marquette Township roads. So they're gonna be looking for things too, those people. If we're paying for this, why aren't we getting more? Where's this dollars going that they're getting in that too? So that's my concern. They're getting state dollars, and, particularly on roads and everything else. And, I think we need to have some of those dollars coming here, because I think in reading the documents here is that question was raised that what would you have done if we didn't do the roads? They didn't want to answer it. So the money is going someplace else on that. And us paying 60%, it's getting to the point you start going up. And I've said this in the past, it's a point in time that when you work your budget, we're going to set in on the budget with you. Because we're going to pay this kind of money, and the money's coming from the state, we should have some say in how it's used. That's my feeling.
Their structure is real different than the way we do budgets and handling our finances. It's like whatever's in front of their face, that's what they fix. There's no plan.
Accountability, or it just
Yeah.
doesn't seem like there's a plan on what's getting fixed this year, or what's getting fixed
and they
next
do plan
year.
it. They have a 5-year plan all the way out. It's on the major stuff. If they're going to fix a portion of 95 or whatever, they do have that, and they know the cost and everything. But day-to-day things, or what comes up monthly or bi-monthly, they just drive around, and when they see something, the staff tells them, and then they say, well, do we have this? Yeah, we've got the money. How bad is it? It's like, because at a Township Relations Committee meeting, when they announced the $6 million that they were going to be getting over the next 6 years, they said that a good part of it, and I forget the percentage, I mentioned this to you before, it was like 80% was going for equipment. And I challenged Jim and said, where are your projects? Where are you repairing roads? Where are you redoing anything? He says, we can't do that. We have to buy equipment. And I said, well, how much are you budgeting every year for equipment? Do you have so much saved up? They have zero. They put zero to equipment in their budget. And I said, that seems like pretty irresponsible management, financial management to me. And of course, Jim took exception to that and was not real happy with me the rest of the meeting, but I said, this isn't reasonable. You have to be accountable for what you can't just put everything to equipment. And they're talking about $100,000 every time they hire a new person. It was just like, it was ridiculous. Dave, go ahead.
I think when you start getting into this, you need to take a look at the agreement that all the townships signed.
I broke that down.
And I believe that agreement, correct me if I'm wrong, gives them a pretty free hand in what they do with the money,
It does, yep,
which is a whole separate issue, but
yeah. But even then, they work for us, in a loose fashion.
not after you read that agreement.
Yeah. Randy?
But realistically, even with the agreement, I think we're in a little different position than other townships and entities are in dealing with the road commission. I think, if we approach this from the standpoint of, we're in the process now of a 15-year plan on maintaining the new roads that we just built. We need to know over that 15 years what it is that the road commission is going to be able to do for us in maintaining those roads, or helping to maintain the roads. So if we are going to have excess, we can take some of that money and address some of the other issues that go along with damaging the roads, like drainage. So, we need to be looking at a plan here, and maybe that's the way we want to approach this with them. We want to sit down and look at a long-term relationship. What is it that you expect to be able to do over the next 15 years, so we can then make our plans in terms of maintaining the road with the millage that we've got. We're putting $7 million into the roads, so,
And that's why I asked about the drain commissioner.
right.
But apparently, we can't really have a relationship with him because they work together.
Well, and the drain commissioner only has authority within established drain areas, and,
Right.
and that's not most of the roads that we have, so I think that's, if we take that approach of saying, we need to sit down and understand where you are over the next 15 years so we can know where we need to be over the next 15 years and both of us maintaining the roads.
Because we've got the standing millage.
I think that's
John?
an excellent point, and that may be the entree we need to use. But I just will remind this board, I think we forget sometimes, we've come a long way in our planning. This community has taken planning seriously for some time. I don't think the county's there yet, frankly. And I don't want to tell that to them, but I believe
You just did.
we need to be careful and I think Gerard's point of approaching this maybe from this other angle is a little bit better way to do it, because then they should understand why we need to know what their plans are. But I don't know if you've ever been to one of their meetings, but anyone who has will know that we've come a long way.
Okay, anything else? Good. I'll put something together tomorrow. Thank you. Where are we in the, okay.
Glad you said that.
Underpass. Jason, you're up. We're gonna talk about the underpass or tunnel, whatever you wanna call it.
Sure. I just wanted to provide, first of all, good evening. I wanted to provide an update on where we were with the project. We were invited last month to present in front of the MNRTF, or the Department of Natural Resources Trust Fund Board. There were approximately 10 other projects that were invited to present there. I feel that that's a good sign from the DNR standpoint. When you're invited to present your project to the board, they obviously want to know more information and are interested in it. To follow that up, we were also contacted at the end of the month, and I kind of held this back from you a little bit because we still don't know if we got the DNR grant, which is designed to be a cost share in the larger transportation grant. But we have been recognized and conditionally awarded $2.4 million to construct this underpass from the DOT with contingencies. First of all, the project cost itself has went up considerably since the study was done by Parsons Brinkerhoff. Those designs and engineering plans that were forecasted were a bit low, and in that the cost of the project went up substantially. I think we estimated it at about 1.5 to 1.75, 1.8 million. The estimated project cost now is 2.2 million. What does that mean for us? Well, we're still working towards getting to the goal by October 1st of generating $75,000 to get our match in for the MNRTF grant. If we're successful with that, it would provide $300,000 match towards the MDOT grant. However, as part of the MDOT grant, the township would be responsible for $196,250, which puts a grand total investment, if you include the $196,250 and the $75,000 match, up to a total investment of $271,000 roughly. right there, 271, 250. That's a lot of money. Now the return on investment is a lot as well. When you look at the overall plan, we did amend the scope of the project as well. The proposed pathway would extend from the Iron Heritage Trail to the highway, but after discussing this with DOT personnel, they recommended, actually it was a suggestion I made early on, but was told no, and then they came back and said, well, that idea is pretty good, to eventually connect to the North Star Academy, because that benefits more users. Therefore, the project's more competitive. So in getting under the highway, we still are able to appease the DNR and the trail connectivity potential of the snowmobile trail number 14 up to Big Bay, because the easements are already there. But what this project would do is essentially go under the highway and then daylight on the north end of the highway, and then come up to the highway grade, and then terminate at the proposed roundabout at the Target Walmart intersection. And then in 2021, or in a subsequent phase, we would utilize the northern MDOT right away, put a pathway across the front of Target to the Senex station, and then work in conjunction with the County Road Commission to utilize the Wright Street right away to connect to North Star Academy, or our existing Safe Routes to School project. That's where our project got really competitive, and that's where the conditional funding came from. Next steps, as far as staff goes, is to continue to work towards the $75,000 match requirement for October 1st. Our easements are secure. Actually, I shouldn't say that. We're still working on the AT&T easement, in that we had to expand it a little bit, because when you daylight a tunnel like that, you need a wider area to secure the embankment and where that tunnel exits. But we do anticipate that that will be granted. That's with AT&T's legal right now. And we feel positive that we'll be able to work with Riverside to acquire an easement there on the north side to install or construct a pathway that comes out at an accessible grade back up to the highway grade. So we would have to use a small portion of the southwestern portion of their property. If we get the funding in place by October 1st for the MNRTF grant, we would have additional time to come up with the rest of the match for the TAP grant application. How long of a time period that is, I don't know. I estimate it to be approximately a year. And if that's the case, we would have to go after some pretty large funding sources, i.e. Perhaps Eagle Mine, or the nickel mine, the hospital, perhaps requesting 2% grants again. I'm hopeful, but I realize that we're up against a wall here, in that it's a large amount of money, and I don't know exactly where we're going to get it, and I don't know what the drop dead date is on trying to acquire it, and how much time and effort to continue to put into it. I do feel it's a great project. It's a legacy project. It's something that the DNR wants to see. It's something that MDOT wants to see. Everybody's working very well together to make it happen. And I'm not sure, at what point we're going to have to raise the white flag and say that we can't do it, or, with the help of management and the board, to figure out some alternatives as far as funding goes. That's where we're at right now.
Jason, you do have some people that have committed money. They don't want to be spoken of, I guess, right now, which is understandable.
Well, it's not, their mechanisms aren't complete yet. But yes, so far we've received $10,000 from the NTN on the Cayman Trail Network, $15,000 from the KVIC from their 2%, $1,000 from the Superior Snowmobile Club. And we do anticipate that the Iron Ore Heritage Rec Authority will contribute at the end of the month. I'll be attending their meeting. We were turned down by the Marquette County CBV. Did request and present there. And we were initially turned down at the Iron Ore Heritage Rec Authority, but some of their capital projects have been delayed for a year, so it was requested that I attend another meeting at the end of the month. We are anticipating that two of the big box retailers in the area will contribute sizable amounts that will hopefully get us to the 75,000. But I can't report on that yet because it's not happened yet.
And then you have your GoFundMe page.
Yeah, and thankfully Lisa's here on behalf of the Mining Journal. You probably saw some media blurbs about that last week. I kind of put the feelers out there with the media to let them know that we were working on this project and that we were trying to do a crowdsourcing endeavor. We've received, I believe, $600 and some in donations so far. Those are from just residents, people that are out in the community. In my experience, people just don't readily hand over money to the government, but they do latch on to projects that they feel passionate about, and people will donate to those, and that's why we utilize that funding source. It's not the first time that's been utilized by other communities, and in some cases it's been very successful, and we're hoping that this one will be too, so we'll run that till the end of the month.
And so if anybody wanted to donate, they could just come into the hall or?
No, they can more easily be at home on their computer and go to GoFundMe and search the US 41 underpass in Marquette Township, and that page will pop up. I'm sure the Mining Journal will provide a link, as well as I think ABC 10 ran a story on it, and TV6 ran a story on it too. And their websites should respectively each have the link on there as well.
I did get some information today, I'm glad you mentioned it, about the Convention Visitors Bureau. And I remember when I was on that board that we had gotten a request from a couple of the different departments in the city for funds as a CVB. I was vice president. And the board decided, and then I was reminded today, and I forgot to tell you, I'm sorry, that the reason those kinds of projects aren't supported is because it could be looked at as infrastructure, and then every community would want tourism dollars for any kind of trails, and then pretty soon it's the drainage, and then pretty soon it's, you know, the lights on the path, and then we're funding infrastructure things. So that was the reason, I guess I asked Reg last night, there was more discussion than I thought, and that was why it had nothing to do with the project itself, just that they didn't want to go down that road.
No, I was relayed that information too from
Okay.
from their staff.
I didn't know.
And I understand that, they're,
Yeah, it's different.
we think tourism
Yeah.
kind of goes hand in hand, but I understand and respect their wishes and desires as a board too. So
Anybody have any?
Jason, are you saying that we don't accept donations here at the office?
Oh, we would certainly accept donations at the office, but at the convenience to the resident, you're certainly welcome to go online and do that. But yes, obviously we'll have
I just want to make sure that
a tip jar
people,
down
if
here
they listen to this,
somewhere.
that it's like you don't want to take donations here, but we will take them, but you can go on.
Absolutely, yes. We'd be very grateful for that. Every little bit helps. I've seen some pretty incredible projects that didn't think had a chance to be funded by crowdsourcing, so we'll see where that goes.
So what if the project fails? How do these people get reimbursed or not, or lose it, or?
We would likely reimburse them, yes, yep.
Because it's going to go in a fund until
Right,
that happens.
it would go in a line item, yeah, we'll talk to Lois, it'd go in a line item, and then we could divvy it back out, yeah. And even the larger donations or charitable contributions coming from the NTN and the tribe, we only need a letter of commitment. We don't need the actual funding from those donors up front. We just need a letter of commitment. On the crowdsourcing end of it, we do need the commitment because that's what generates that funding source.
Any other questions for Jason? Great report, thanks.
You're welcome. If anybody has gold in their backyard, let me
Keep us informed, yes.
Oil.
All right. Board member comment regarding what we're hearing from the external environment about township issues and activities. So I'll start it off because this is new. I did have, excuse me, a couple email conversations with library director Andrea. And we're trying to figure out how to have some kind of communication between our two entities, the library board and this board. She suggested she could probably come to some of our meetings. Now, if you remember, their board meeting is right before our second meeting of the month. And before, when I was the liaison, the meetings start at 5:30 and they usually went until 8. They would meet once a month. So I would leave the meeting to get here for 7 o'clock. So I didn't always get all of the information, but I had a good part of it and I was able to contribute. They were very gracious about asking questions and giving me information to bring back, and I would give a report. But I would do it from the perspective of how it helped the township. I was not a library supporter for their cause. I was representing the township as a liaison. So in my discussion with her about that, we talked about the usability of the TAC, which is the Township Advisory Council. And that started when the library and the whole millage and everything began, way back when. There's no good way to get connection unless, I had asked before, one of us were to go to all of their meetings, which is because the scheduling is kind of tough. So Andrea's said, I can get you the minutes or the whole packet. I suggested at least the minutes in the agenda to keep us informed on what's kind of going on, unless you want something else. The next TAC meeting actually is going to be here Thursday night in the community room, which again is the Township Advisory Council. They meet quarterly, and then one of their board members, or one of their council members, it's a committee, reports to the board every month, the library board. So they are in touch with the library board every month, but we get nothing. And since we're giving them well over $120,000 a year of taxpayer money, I think we should know what's going on. Short of, what movies they're showing. I mean, the real meat and potatoes. So I don't know if you have any suggestions. Can I inundate you with at least the minutes in the agenda in the packet so that you can at least keep up with that part of it? I just didn't want to give you a whole bunch more stuff, especially with new agenda. If you have any ideas, feel free to, call me, or somebody wants to volunteer. John, you want to volunteer?
No, I don't want to volunteer, but I'll suggest that why don't you have some kind of a drop spot here at the township where they could send their communications like they do to their members, and then anyone who's interested stop by and read it. If they want to make copies, they can make copies. But to send us every month.
Not the whole packet, because that's sizable. You remember
bet.
that. It's very sizable.
And I bet it isn't read very often either. So I would suggest that we could have a location where their minutes could be sent here and maintained for anyone who wants to stop by and read it.
Okay. Usually their minutes are only a couple pages, and then the agenda. That's all I was thinking about for the packet. And it wouldn't hurt the public to know, too, who might not be able to get down there or know what their business is.
That would save a lot of publication.
Okay.
That'd be good enough. Actually, you really have to remember, in the end, the library has developed into the City of Marquette Community Center. Their officers, their members of their commission call it their new community center. So when the time comes for us to be thinking about sending money again, or we don't send them the money, what we do is we put it on the ballot, and then people interpret that we support it and wouldn't put it on the ballot, and then it gets voted on, and that's how they get $120 or more thousand dollars. But I would suggest that we just limit our ongoing involvement with them to simply having a place where you could read the minutes of their meetings if you chose to, and let it go at that.
Okay, Dave?
I, for one, would like to see the minutes. We're only talking a couple pages there. I would like to see them as part of our packet. It'd give you a good taste of what's going on over there. And what I would probably do if they were dropping them off here someplace is I would eventually just not get to them to read them if they just get too busy. If they were part of the packet, that'd be great for me.
Okay. The only other thing I wanted to mention was we had a request from a resident to put some information out on distemper. There's been some problems in the yards with raccoons and dogs, and so we did put this right in the last packet, I believe, for the utilities. You really can't zoom in on that, John, but it was just a one-page information. So just get a little more information out there anyway. That's our job, is to try to communicate, you know.
It's been a pretty big problem this summer.
Yeah,
The
that's what I'm
raccoons.
hearing. So those are the only things community-wise that I wanted to share. I don't know if anybody has anything else. Have you gotten any phone calls or, Pete?
With this road project being, the roads are all done, I just wanted to comment about the people in our block anyways. You see all these kids out with their skateboards going up and down the street. Before, they could never do that. You know, it's kind of nice to see the kids out there doing that, and also the adults are with their kids. I never see one cell phone yet, so that's kind of encouraging. So
That's good.
I just think there are more benefits because of that, refixing the road, than just the cars.
And I've had kids learning to ride their bikes again, you know, the parents pushing them and not being worried about big bumps or potholes and stuff to make the kids wipe out. So, and I've heard nothing but good comments on how nice of roads that we do have.
And that's the importance of getting people to know what the speed limit is. There's one guy that I have to get to yet that I don't think he understands how fast he's going up and down the street, but I'll get him.
Well, Randy's working on that. He threw it back over to the road commission, so they're gonna just love us up there in Negaunee, or Ishpeming Township. Or actually Ishpeming. Okay, nothing else? All right. Got that one. We don't have an annual plan of work yet, so that's no good. Policy discussion, consideration, and development. So Randy Rattari was good enough to, well, he printed just a couple of these because he was afraid to start putting them in bound pages. But he did send you the email link to the Marquette Township Board Policy Manual. It's not official, and that's why it's on the agenda, to see if this is something we want to support. Dave?
When I downloaded that and it come up with the program I downloaded in showed a number of typos, number of suggested corrections to make. So I would think before we do too much farther with that, somebody needs to check that and see if it's just my program and I downloaded it into Word. But my only comment with the content is down in 3172.
Okay, hold on, we'll catch up to you.
And it is the, I'll just read it. It says, just to assure compliance with Open Meetings Act and to support board holism, electronic media will not be used to express personal opinion or for deliberation of issues among board members. Electronic media may be used for announcements or background information on agenda items to the board. I don't see where, I can understand why they're putting a restriction on electronic media, but I'm wondering about the rest of the media.
Oh, really electronic?
Not really.
Focus is in emails,
If
but
I write a letter, can I send it to all the boards to express my personal opinion?
Yeah, but we usually don't respond.
Well, it doesn't matter. I mean, the intent here is obviously addressing electronic media, but I'm just suggesting that with a change of a word in there, that would more rightly apply to any kind of correspondence that is going out to, from one board member to the balance of the board members to express a personal opinion.
It'd be any media,
Right.
instead of electronic. I don't
Okay.
have a problem with that.
Okay, that makes sense.
Copy for Dave, let's see if that's the same as.
Yep, we got draft number 5.
See, in your program, just make sure that,
Oh,
it might be the way that it's sent, maybe it's on the review. Let's see, show final mark. You have to show final, that should be, everything should be done. I think it's the way you viewed it
okay, that could be.
in your program.
So are you suggesting then that
Well,
the
I'm just-
second word
yeah.
electronic?
Showing things like this where
Yeah,
stuff
we
like
can,
that.
we can fix that.
that's just in the program itself, and I don't want to bore everybody with the,
How about the second word electronic? In the second?
yeah, I was just
Strike that
suggesting
too?
that there should be some way to, Randy took it away, so I don't know where we are.
With the 317?
3172. It's in the
I
governance.
don't have a
policy.
problem with the word any instead of electronic there, because it,
Yeah, and that's all I'm suggesting, it just, I mean, it's obviously not just for electronic media.
I thought we took that out.
And I think if you go back and look at it in comparison to the Open Meetings Act, the only difference is that I can send everybody on the board my personal opinion on a subject, and the only time you're violating Open Meetings Act is if one of you guys reply to me. I don't think that's the intention. The intention is to not have that opinion stating across the board. If you've got a question, send it to the manager. If you've got a question about a procedure, ask the supervisor, but you shouldn't be sampling the entire board,
Right.
especially expressing your opinion on any subject, whether it's an agenda item or not,
Mhm.
in my personal opinion.
Okay, so we can check that, find out what Susan has to say, and unless, Roger, have you got a thought? You don't have the document to look
I
at.
don't have the document to know the context of what we're.
Yeah, okay.
I don't have a problem with any though. Any media just covers everything instead of electronic, because if you have paper media, because sometimes we do get a letter from someone.
And
that is paper.
that'd be as simple as just 3172 there, it's just changing it from electronic media to any media will not be used to express personal opinion.
And then on the bottom,
Yeah.
any media may be used for announcements.
Correct.
Second from the bottom.
It's not really a big change, it just covers everything instead of just electronic stuff.
Okay. Well, and these aren't, if we vote on this, this is not in stone. This is not something that can't be changed again. It's just a starting point. As we work through this and we see that maybe one of these policies is not as conducive to the township as we thought, we change it, and then we amend it.
Well, every agenda you have policy discussion on here, so that would be your time to talk about it too. If we find out something isn't what we thought it should be, we can work on it.
Is this some kind of a concern that, the reason that it's in here is that you think maybe the concern could be that they're not sure whether the electronic media will truly be sent to all people?
No, it was the
Is it-
deliberating
is it-
thing.
Is it, huh?
It's the deliberating thing. It's replying all, and it's trying to, because it's tying into the Open Meetings Act
Yeah,
and the deliberating idea.
but
Not
saying,
allowing it.
saying you won't use electronic media to do it, seems to me like they have some concern about whether electronic media can be depended on to communicate to all. That's what it seems like.
I don't think so.
I just think,
But we've had people on the board not get certain things from time to time, and I think that, I'm wondering whether that isn't really
No, I remember the discussion. It was the email, respond to all, which is a OMA violation anyway.
Yeah.
To start deliberating. Well, I think, well, you shouldn't be doing this, and why are we doing this? We can't do that. That was the intent
I think
originally.
Dave's point is good. It's not that. I just wondered what the real intent was of this.
Yep, it was email originally. Dave?
I remember that whole discussion when we had the video in there with Susan, and it was the reply all as opposed to, and the Open Media Act says there's nothing the matter with me sending out a communication to everybody on the board and ranting for 2 hours on something. The problem is if one of you dare to reply to me, now we violated the Open Meetings Act. I'm just suggesting that the reason that was in there, according to the explanation at the time, is it prevents that from happening. If you prevent me from sending out my 2-hour rant on electronic media, then it prevents you from replying to reply all. My point is that not only should it not be happening on electronic media, but I have no business sending out a rant to all the board members about anything that's my personal opinion. If I want to send supporting documents for an agenda item, that's a completely separate thing, and that should be sent through the manager anyway, so that it can be included in the packet. But I shouldn't be sending out communications to the balance of the board member on my personal opinion about anything.
Okay, then I was going to say, that limits some of the information John has given us in our mailboxes over the years.
I've been doing that for 9 years now. It's the only way you can communicate to the board.
Well,
You can't, if
this
you
is
have
the
to wait
forum.
for it to be an agenda item, you can't speak to it.
Necessarily.
Well, that's
I'm just saying,
that's what he's saying.
if it's,
Well, that's
if
not
it
really what I'm
says any.
saying. What I'm suggesting is that if it's important enough to be discussed at a board level, then it should be an agenda item and it should be discussed in an open meeting. It should not be discussed in any kind of media across the board. That's what I'm saying. And if it is an agenda item and there is some supporting documents that anyone would wish to have the board members all get to aid in making their point, then you would most appropriately send that through the manager and have it included in the board packet. It wouldn't be something that you email out to everybody. And there's a big difference between a personal opinion and supporting documents.
You have a confession for that, Dave.
They have, so if someone had an opinion about something, they shouldn't communicate to their fellow board members about it. What they should do is send a communication to the manager to have them put it in the agenda, on the agenda. That doesn't make sense to me.
Again, in my opinion, if it is noteworthy enough to discuss at a board level, then it's noteworthy enough to discuss at an open board meeting, as opposed to communications back and forth between board members.
That'd be, long as a full board is always communicating with each other, that's appropriate. That's allowed under the Open Meetings Act, as long as everybody's included. It's when you start to have individual members
There's a
communicating.
fine line between me expressing my opinion and one or two board members expressing an opposing opinion back to me through the same
That-
media. It now becomes debate, and which cannot happen except in an open meeting.
It also
Sig-
becomes a violation of the Open Meetings
And I'm
Act.
suggesting that it's the first step that causes that to happen.
You want to eliminate the first step. Roger?
Well, I guess what I wanted to clarify is you cannot ever be having any deliberation among board members at anything other than an Open Meetings Act. And I think a couple of comments that have been made have stated something different than that. And I think it was by error, or a slip of speech rather than an intent. But you can't ever have responses by what would amount to a quorum. And the danger with electronic communication is the ability of which it can also not only be hit reply all, but can be forwarded from one person to another in a way that's a little bit more difficult if it's just a one-on-one
Yeah, on
conversation
Facebook.
type of thing, or a letter, or things of that nature. Facebook is a good example, or Twitter, or any of the other electronic media as well. So, what you do with this particular policy is not a legal issue, but whatever you do with this policy, you cannot be having communications that amount to replies and deliberations among what would amount to a quorum. And the way to prevent that is to eliminate those communications that require a response, or that invite a response. That's a better way of putting it, is to eliminate those.
And before, this was not a new policy that we just created when we had our last session with Susan. This was part of the original one, and I'm pretty positive it had to do with emails specifically. And that's why we said electronic media. So if we want to create some kind of a communication policy other than electronic media, then that would have to happen separate from this. But this, I'm pretty sure, refers to emails. Randy?
Yeah, I think the key in that whole thing is where it says among board members. That's the key. Because basically, if you'll remember, the issue that was rampant east of us for quite some time involved one communicating to one communicating to another, one communicating to another, one communicating to another. Never the group, but there was coordination among all of those individual communications between one-on-ones. And that's what I think this is getting at, is, when it says that, to express personal opinion or for deliberation issues among, and among is even italicized, among board members. You cannot be going back and forth on anything electronically because a couple of reasons. One is it becomes a public document, which means your electronic device becomes subpoenable. And everything on it is now open, whether it's confidential or not. So I think that's why electronic is identified here specifically, is because there are no controls on it, and it does open Pandora's box in essence if you step across the line.
And remember, this is for future boards too. This isn't just for us, it's for board members. If all 7 of us are gone next year and the township is still utilizing this policy book, it falls to them. So we can sit here and say, well, I don't do that, or I've never done it, or I will never do it. But what we want to get in place is something structural for the future boards. That's part of the reason. We're not just doing this for us, we're doing it for the whole township. So different people are going to be sitting in these seats, and we want to make sure that they're not going to do this. Can they change it? Absolutely. It's pretty fluid. But at least if you have things in place to start. But I think electronic needs to stay there. I think it had that intent. And if we want to come up with something else on different methods, that's for another time.
So is there any suggested revision to that?
I wouldn't revise it.
I
That's
wouldn't
my
either,
opinion.
but I just
would
want
leave
to
it.
know whether that's what's
But it's
being-
been suggested that we take electronic out, so. If we're gonna change, I don't know, procedure-wise, I don't know if we were gonna change this, if we approve the policy manual, because we haven't done that yet. This isn't just us having the manuals, or the policies approved, and now we're amending one. This is something we're gonna do as a whole. So if we wanna change it, I don't know if we have to do it twice, or if we just change it and then do it.
My thinking is that it should stay the way it is. And revising it, why it's there is really because the electronic communication ability that we all have has a tendency to invite intercommunications, and they may bridge that gap to where you are in violation of the Open Meetings Act. And that's why it's there. I think that, my guess is that that's why it's embedded in here, and I think it should stay for now. We can look at it with time, but I wouldn't pull it out of there based on the concern that's been expressed.
So the question is whether we approve this manual. That's why it's before you. Yes, Roger?
Just one follow-up on what I said previously. Regardless of whether you have a policy on it or not, state law says that you must comply with the Open Meetings Act,
Right.
and that means that you can't have communications among each other on the street corner or having coffee. So, again, regardless whether you have a policy that says it, state law already mandates that. So this is, to some degree, clarifying perhaps one component of state law, specifically with respect to electronic communication, but I don't know that you need to have a policy that expressly prohibits what state law is already prohibiting in any event. If that makes sense.
So I guess I would recommend that we pass this, so we have something in place. Susan was concerned that we weren't doing it right away a month ago or so. We ended up having a couple video conferences in the meantime, which is fine. She was more concerned that staff didn't have direction, and if policies weren't in place, that they wouldn't know what to do, but it hasn't been that critical. So I would recommend that we at least pass this, and we can always change it. At least we have something in place to work from, because the old policies are archaic.
The motion would be, which I'll make the motion, is to remand the old township policies, or to discontinue the old township policies and remand them to operational policies determined by staff, and to approve the new policy manual effective immediately.
Support.
Motion and support. That was a recommended motion from Susan, so we covered removing the old policies and implementing these effective today.
Both.
So we know. So roll call.
Clerk Rattari is yes. Trustee Marks?
Yes?
Trustee LaRue?
Yes?
Trustee Wiegand?
Yes.
Trustee Everson?
Yes.
Treasurer Johnson?
Yes.
And Supervisor Durant.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Now, anytime we want to change any of these, we can have this discussion. That's what that agenda item is for. That's the whole purpose. Well, not the whole purpose, but if there's something that we need to consider. Go ahead, Ernie.
In talking about the policies and state law and that, it all depends on who's sitting in these seats. If they're gonna follow it. Doesn't make any difference what you have writing and what the state says, what we have writing. Whoever's sitting here, you hopefully that they're gonna follow it. They don't have to.
Yep.
They'll do what they want.
But sometimes it's easier, especially with new people, to come in and learn a certain way and keep it going.
It's
least
a
till they know what they're
tremendous
doing.
Guide is what it is.
It is. Yep, it is.
But you get, when you go to meetings and, you can't even, you've got too many people here, you shouldn't be sitting next to each other. You hear, that's all you hear.
Yeah.
I said, yeah, we might be the only township who really cares. We don't discuss it, just
We
for
don't have
everyone
our
else. We don't go, if we're having coffee, we're not discussing township.
We're discussing who's paying for it.
Not the township.
Yeah, not the township.
That's right. All right, thank you for that. 9 is assurance of organizational performance. And we did pull 2 items from the consent agenda, just because Ernie wanted to talk about wastewater management and the charter agenda item, 3A and 5A.
I just want to bring up a couple points reading through it. When I started reading through it, it says one thing, the project will be fully funded with no rate increase required. And reading through it, that sounds good. And going back on to page 3, down at the bottom, the board discussed funding for the project. They asked for a financial breakdown of each individual upgrade being performed at the wastewater plant. A breakdown is not available at this time. Funding operation was discussed. These options were not available at this time. I'm getting to the point, I'm really concerned if there's gonna be no increase, you don't even know what the budget is, you can't get any information to make any long-range planning in that, so what's going on in that? And then reading further on the budget, they talk administrative seat, the insurance line item was overlooked in the budget process. What's going on there in that? And we're part of it, so I'm beginning to question who's looking at this stuff and who is not looking at it. I may be off base, but reading through this, it just didn't make sense to me at all. I don't know what's happening there, and it just struck me very funny. And maybe I look at financials too much.
Why don't I send them an email or give them a phone call and find out if they can clarify that to the director. So then charter, they're on here all the time with comments.
Yeah. The question, I brought this up before, is you got that new, we went from 3% to 5% in that, get the
Correct.
additional dollar amounts in that. The question I raised to the board is, where do we want to put this money? Do we want to designate it from her, or just send it to the general fund in that? And this has been commented a number of different times in different meetings now and in the past in that. We're beginning this in every quarter, and we got 16,000 this time, and there was about a $6,600 increase over last time. So we want to
Earmark it.
earmark it for any place, or just let it go into the general fund.
Randy?
Well, back when I was on the board, I don't know, probably 8 years ago now, 8, 9 years ago when I was a trustee, I think our intention of that money was to put it into communications because it was gathered from communications. So we were going to try to fund, which we're going to need upgrades in board computers and
It's been done.
other things that maybe that funding would help with. So that's what my intention of the charter communication money would be to help fund those type of things for communications for us and the residents, because the residents are paying it. We should do as much as we can to communicate with them, so, with that money.
I think it's a great idea. We just put it as a line item and for that type of expenditure and go from there.
We can always move it somewhere else if we want to. It's-
Do whatever we want with the money.
So we want to direct staff to establish a line item? Is that what you're asking for?
I'm just bringing it up to the board to see what the board feeling is on it.
That makes the most sense.
Okay.
I think that would be probably a good item in budget discussion, which is gonna be shortly.
Whenever it is, I just wanted to bring it up and go from there.
Okay.
Now, we discussed that a couple years back about that money gonna be used for like upgrading our audio and stuff like that. That's where it's supposed to go.
Well, it's just in the general fund right now, so it
Yeah.
goes for, basically it went for upgrades, but not specifically. Okay. We'll look at it in budget. Okay, thank you. Staff report. I had touched briefly on it in my explanation. Going back to the communication thing, I have troubles with the liaisons and the reports and not getting any kind of communication from some of these folks. We don't hear from planning. Our liaison is not giving us any kind of report. We get the minutes and the agenda. Once in a while, we get a road report if there's something to report. I'm just using these as an example because we have 21 committees, and that does include more than a half a dozen of legislative groups, like the DDA and the, not the corridor, but the the Board of Review and that kind of stuff. They're real, and even the Planning Commission is in there too. But whether it's the library or the Heritage Trail, I finally got the information on how to get a hold of Glenn Johnson from the Heritage Trail. That's another group that we don't hear from ever. We get their minutes, I shouldn't say ever. We don't have any communication with them ever. We get their, right, yeah, it's a tax. So our people should know what's going on with these committees. And if they're meeting on a regular basis, we need to know about it. It comes, my whole argument is these committees are arms of the board. We're supposed to be directing them on what to do, whether that's the Planning Commission or the Rec Committee, or the Heritage Trail is a little bit different because that's millage funded specifically, so is the library. We can only request so much. They are an independent authority. They can do what they want. They're more like a city or a municipality. But our committees that we have, we need to be directing them as to what they should be working on. They get together and form their own agendas, and they say, well, we should be looking at this item, or we should be looking at that. Is that what we want to do? I mean, do we want to give them the freedom? Like I mentioned before, Michigan Township Association says you should have no committees, no standing committees. I'm not talking about like the Planning Commission. I mean a real committee that we appoint. If we have an issue like the road issue, we should put a committee together. They work on it. They disband. Recreation, unless they're working on something that we've directed them to do or the Planning Commission has directed them to do, they should not exist. Now, this is according to them, but I have a lot that I agree with. The Election Commission is separate because that has a specific criteria. Community events, that's kind of an ongoing, and they do report to us, so we have good connection there. Heritage Trail doesn't work. Wastewater, we do get the minutes. I've been trying to go to those meetings. We get the Corridor Committee reports in our agenda, in our packets. Labor negotiating's different. Safety Committee hasn't met. Personnel only meets when it has to. So I guess my biggest issue is finding out what planning's doing and having a conversation with them, whether that means we meet more frequently together, because we haven't met with them in quite a while. Recreation Committee, they just go do what they want, come up with their own agendas. Road Committee, that's kind of different because we're in the middle of a project. We do get reports on that. So I just want to make sure that we're being told what's being worked on out there. And I'm looking for help on how to encourage that. John?
First of all, I think we need to be very careful because we've got some really dedicated people on these committees. We don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but the bottom line is, right from the beginning of policy government, we were encouraged to say everything should start from the board. The board is the elected officials who should be indicating policy and should be indicating what they would like committees to work on. Committees need to be communicated with, that if they have something that they want to suggest that they work on, that they come back and ask the board, talk to the board about it, and see what the board's feeling is. Because the board can't have a wild cannon out there. You just can't. So what we should be encouraging, I think, maybe the polite way to do it is to encourage the committees, either their chair or the committee as a whole, when they have something that they think is really an issue of great interest that they would like to follow, that they come back and at least communicate to the board what they're thinking about it, and share with us the values of that, and then get some kind of a reading, either from the board as to whether they should pursue that issue. The bottom line is, only the supervisor should indicate issues that they should search, or the board as a whole. No one board member, other than the supervisor, has that authority.
I don't know that I would either.
Well, but the point is, you do have that authority. But it's either that or the board as a whole in a session. And the only way you can get that out of a session is have them come and tell the board as a whole, they've got this issue that they think is really great and they'd like to explore it. What do you think about that? And we communicate our feelings about that. If they don't have 4 votes, we shouldn't look at it.
Randy?
My comment on committees is every year we're going to have a board plan of work, and the plan of work from this board is going to include its committees, and that's where the committees need to, they can come and meet with us that time of year, and we kind of set the agenda for our work for that year, because we're the ones that give them the resources to do that. So if we're not going to give them the resources, they shouldn't be going after something they're not going to be supported by us. So I think in policy governance, our annual plan of work, either in December or January for the following year, will include the committees, and they can tell us what's going on and whether or not we should continue that course for that year, or what we would like them to work on for that year. Because we, again, give them the resources, because they have no authority for spending or obligating the township for anything other than coming back to this board and recommending. So I think that would be a perfect opportunity when we do our annual plan of work to get the committees on board and where we're going.
Yep, that's a good idea. Randy and I both said to Susan about doing it in December, but then we're kind of thinking more tying it into the budget, because we don't want to wait till the last minute either to try to figure out what we're going to do next year. So I guess maybe we could try to schedule some of these groups to come in, whether the whole group or the chairman, while we're doing budgets. And when we get to that, whether it's a general fund or fire or whatever it is, whatever group it pertains to, ask them to come in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because ultimately, and I don't have a problem when we do it, it's just that they have to be included into our plan of work, because if, like the recreation committee's working on this underpass, they're going to need substantial amount of resources for it, and they're going to have to ultimately come to us for that. So, I mean, we should be involved in that. And I mean, we are in a certain extent, but we need to be involved because those resources are going to be could be pretty extensive from what our planner said tonight. So, and same thing with the roads, although the roads are in a project, but if they need any resources, that should come back to us also. And the different committees, like the election committee and the planning commission, the zoning board of appeals, there's nothing really we can do about those because they're standing committees by law, and that's a little different. But these other committees that, like you said, they just can't go on their own, which I don't think they have to a certain extent, but we just have to include them in our annual plan of work, which I think that's a good idea, inviting them in either October or November, getting their where they're going, and then we can include them in the budget.
Okay. Dave?
I guess I'm going to take some exception to some of the things that have been said here tonight.
Okay.
First,
I pigeonholed you, I know.
I go back to the letter that Trustee Marks distributed to all the board members with respect to the committees. And I would make a couple comments right off the bat. First, I had a note on here that when it comes to this agenda item, if it is the board's intention that they want a written report from all those committees, or if they want the verbal report that they've been getting, and that's board decision. We'll make any difference. But with respect to the road and rec committees, I would challenge anybody on the board to tell me anything that either one of those committees have done that the board has not been asked about first and have not given their approval to press on and then come back to them with a report. The board has always had the final approval on whatever the road and rec committees have done. Be that as it may, I mean, you could disband both those committees tomorrow, you wouldn't hurt my feelings a bit. It just gave me a little more free time. But it just sounds like what I'm hearing here with respect to those two committees is they're running off like loose cannons and just doing all kinds of different things with no controls on them. And they haven't spent any money that the board has authorized them to spend. They haven't taken on any projects that the board has not authorized them to continue the research on. The committees come to the board with suggestions of things that the board might want to look at, and the board with respect to the roads and the board with respect to the grants has said go ahead and proceed with those to a point. And because the board always makes the final decision on whether you're going to proceed with them or not. They have right down the line. They have on the grants, they have on the road projects. I mean, they've been the ones that have made the decisions on that, as they should be. The reports are always there. And if you want more than the minutes, then it's the fault of the board that they don't get more than the minutes, because the minutes are very elaborate to the point that they explain everything that's going on in those committees. So if you read the minutes, you should know everything we've talked about. And whether it's, if it's been a what if that's been talked about, it's in the minutes. And so everybody on the board should be able to get a grasp on what the what ifs that have been talked about. But then when you get specifically to the Planning Commission, I guess that one just kind of throws me. And I'm referring to Trustee Mark's letter that was distributed to all the board members. And just a couple items that just leaped out at me, and it was a suggestion that the pedestrian connectivity and design standards were the Planning Commission taking the ball and running with it and pointing out that there is a public hearing on the 13th with text amendments that kind of blindsided the board. And I would remind the board that the pedestrian connectivity was approved by this board back in October of 2016. And it was recommended at that same meeting that the Planning Commission go back and look at the pedestrian connectivity portion of that and come back to the board with some recommendations. And that's in fact what they're in the process of doing. And they're going through the steps to do that. That's part of what this public hearing is about, because that's one of their steps, to come back to the board with a recommendation. With respect to tiny homes and short-term rentals, this has been on the radar and in the minutes, and it's been discussed at these board meetings with updates as long as I've been on the board, which has been in December. The tiny homes and short-term rentals have been discussed since September of 2016. So it's been over a year that these have been discussed. And they're always in the minutes, and I know that as long as I've been on this board, there's always been updates with respect to them. Those text amendments that are surrounding around tiny homes and short-term rentals is also coming up as part of that public hearing on the 13th of this month. Everybody knows about that. The board has talked about it at numerous occasions. The Planning Commission isn't out there doing anything that the board doesn't know about. And I would take exception to something that was said that the board is to guide everything that the Planning Commission is doing. If you go back and look at the bylaws for the Planning Commission, to work on those items as directed by the board is item 1 of 5. And there are 4 other items that the Planning Commission is supposed to look at and make recommendations to the board. And one is the zoning ordinances, and that's exactly what they've been doing with their text amendments. So I don't understand some of the comments that Trustee Marks made in his communication to all the board members. That's what prompted my comment about The policy governance is when that kind of a letter comes out and it is overburdened with inaccuracies and inaccurate facts, then it's very difficult not to get on the computer and respond to that. And that's a violation of Open Meetings Act. I take that personal, probably more personal than I should, because it happens to be committees that I work on, and I'm the board rep to the Planning Commission, and I know what communications have gone on from the Planning Commission back to the board. And our supervisor has sat in on a number of board meetings or Planning Commission meetings and reported back to the board with what's going on. So to suggest that it's assuming tacit board approval by the things the Planning Commission does, I'm suggesting that it is board approval of what the Planning Commission is working on, because the board knows exactly what the Planning Commission is working on. And they have all along, they have for over a year, almost a year and a half on the pedestrian or design standards amendment, and they have known for over a year on the tiny homes and short-term rentals. And it's been with the full board support that we work on those text amendments. And they're following the procedures that are outlined in the bylaws to come back to a recommendation with the board. And the final step on that procedure is to have a public hearing. That's a Planning Commission function. That's part of their bylaws. They're going to have that public hearing on the 13th, and whether they come out of that public hearing with a recommendation to the board, or whether they talk about it at a successive meeting before they come back for a recommendation to the board, that's the Planning Commission doing their job. And I guess I take exception when there's a suggestion that we're off as a Planning Commission doing things that are not condoned by the board.
I would say, would you think as the liaison that you should be giving us some kind of a conversation report, or that would fall to planning?
That was
Have
one of my questions on that agenda item, is if the board wants written report, like you get a staff report. I give the verbal updates now. Anything that's going on in planning, roads, or rec, I give a verbal
That's the minutes.
update. And the minutes are in the board packet, so I mean, you can do it any way you want, but it's direction from the board that causes that to happen. If you want more of a verbal update on everything that's going on, I guess what's been earmarked so far on the roads, for example, is the progress on the project we got going. And what's going on with the rec committee is the project and the changes in the grants and where those stand and how we're doing on getting those projects done. Everything else you can read in the minutes, and most of them are what ifs, or wouldn't it be nice if we could do this? And for example, we've got a gentleman that wants to put a single track bike at Schwemmwood, and it's a what if. And he's been charged with, if you want to do all this, you put it all together and come back with us and present it, and if we think it's worthwhile, then we'll take it to the board and see what they think of it. But it's simply a what if. It's not committing anybody to anything. And it was my opinion that that's what the committees are out there to do. They're out there to represent the residents of this township and bring concerns and desires and wants to the board's attention. And I think they do that.
Okay, Pete?
I have to agree a lot with David, because we sit on the same committees, at least two of them, the roads and recreation. And I honestly believe that if it wasn't for the committee, we wouldn't see these roads out here as we are right now. We educated the people, so to speak, that before the board decided on it, we had open meetings, then we had special meetings. We had 18 meetings we sat here. And the public came in at their will, and we stayed here for 18 of those to answer any and all questions. The recreation, and then we have, after, with the result of that, we came back to the board. The board made that decision to put it on for millage. The recreation area, we never would have seen the warming shed. A lot of the stuff's been just going into dormant, not taken care of. But with the interest of the people that you have on the committees, you know, like Mike Springer, he's always there. And as far as reporting, you get more if it gets any more reporting and slides and that, you're gonna have to order popcorn, you know. But you do, you should be able, if you read your packet, you read everything there is, if you talk to us on the side, you'll hear more of what's going on as far as the roads and that, and complaining of people. And I don't know, we have, I sat on a lot of committees, not only here but other places, and we're very productive as far as Marquette Township is concerned. It wouldn't hurt me a bit. I could get off of 7 of them, I guess, and I'd have more time. But I think they're effective, and that's the only reason I like to stay on them. And I tell my wife, we're making progress. But we're not making, the board has to do it first. They have to allocate the money to get it done. You know, but there should be no surprises. I mean, people want different things than they did years ago. They just want to go down the street. Now they want to be able to walk, bike, and skateboard on our streets. And we have to have it so they don't get hurt. So I think committees are important because the staff's not going to get it done because we don't have that big of a staff that worry about everything. And we attend meetings outside of this board. When we go downstate and stuff like that, we go to all these other conferences and find out what other people are doing and bring it back to our way of thinking and see if we can do it. But I think it's important, but we have to get more people active in some of these things, that we're not 4 or 5 people on every committee in there. So.
Thank you for that. I'm just looking for the communication side of it, so that this board knows it isn't necessarily what's in the minutes, it's having these conversations on what's happening out there.
I don't know which of in
That's
here
the
was
important
done
part.
without the board knowledge.
I'm not saying anything was done
No, but I'm just saying, so
improperly
you know
or-
that it's coming back to us.
It's looking at the agendas that are longer than ours at the board, and all these things that are being discussed, and it's like, who told you to do that? You know, and if the board is okay with whatever you guys wanna do, and then come back to us later, that's fine with me. I'll go with
Well, a lot of things are done without even the board knowledge. I mean, as far as fixing things up and that. Like fixing the gate on the thing, or fixing a hole, if somebody punched a hole in the warming shed over there, you know you do that. But if you take pride in your community and stuff like that, but it's when it comes to money, residents' money, it comes to the board. I don't know any other way of looking at it, but
Dave?
I would suggest that we can do any meeting or any report that the board decides they want. They just have to ask for it. It's been the committee's understanding that the minutes were kept verbose, if you would, because it communicated everything that we were talking about at those meetings. If that's not sufficient, if that doesn't get the word across, then it can be presented in any format you want. The board just has to relay what format they want.
This,
John?
yeah. It's not that things have not been talked about in general over the years. It's not that things have not been indicated that maybe we need to be looking at what the state is doing in these areas. Those are all things that we all of this board hears from our planner and from board members, and that's okay. That doesn't give you license, though, as a board member, to go ahead and go into the detail of these issues. I can tell you that for the first time anyone read anything about short-term rentals, tiny homes, or some of the other things that were discussed that were at the Planning Commission, that for the first time you really read about them in detail as being substantive and going to be moved ahead, was when you read the minutes that were referred to in the early part of our agenda. when you read that at home, when you got your communication electronically of what was going to be on the agenda, that's when you could read then in the minutes of that committee in detail, and clearly they were talked about. But they were not ever brought back to the board and discussed as we're going to go ahead with this, and we're going to put them into a format that we're going to have a public hearing on. That was the first indication that some of these things were going to be finalized and put into a public hearing. I think what Lynn was asking for was, well, maybe not. Maybe I'll just say I would have looked forward to, would have been an update that this is where we are and this is where we are on the agenda of these issues, and we're close to having a public hearing. What do you think about it? And it would have given then board members an opportunity to talk about short-term rentals, something that we were hearing somewhat for the first time at a business meeting. Tiny homes and accessory structure types and pedestrian connectivity. Every one of those, yes, they were talked about at one time or another as being issues that were on the agenda for later review by the Planning Commission. But none of them had been finalized and presented to the board as saying, we're going to now have a public hearing on this. What do you think of it? Nobody did that. And maybe you don't feel like you have to, but it seems to me like the board would be better informed if they had that kind of an update. Certainly before you'd have a public hearing on it, because a public hearing is tantamount to the board endorsing it. No one, the public out there is not going to think a public hearing is being conducted just because the Planning Commission alone wanted to hold it. They're going to think that it's because the township board supports that and wants it held. And all that's being asked for is an update on these things before you go to that final motion of having a public hearing. It would have only taken a short time to talk about those things. And if there are new issues, and Dave is claiming they're not, and I won't argue that, but if there are new issues, whether they're at the Planning Commission or the Recreation Committee or any other committee, there's only in our recent passage of covenants was that that authority should come from the board as a whole. They're talking about the 7-member board, or from the supervisor. That's where that direction comes from. And Clerk Rattari has suggested that those things should come up at a meeting. I think they should too. I think they should be brought up to a level where we're going to do something about this now. We've talked about it for 2 years, but now we're going to take some action on it, and we're going to formalize it. And before you have a public hearing that looks like it's total board support, I think you should pay the courtesy of having an update. And another point about this is that don't let us forget that all the time in our policy governance, from the beginning, she said the danger of a board member serving on a committee as a member has to remember that while they're there, they're a committee member. They're not a board member. And I think that that needs to be, we need to embed that into our minds when we think about that, when we're on these committees. Because I think that we intimidate the non-board members on those committees. So we have to be careful about that we're simply another committee member. And then we should follow some rules, and I don't think that what Lynn is asking for, about having an update before moving to a public hearing that's so official, you need to pass on updates. And that's all that's being asked for. It isn't a criticism of any committee. Hell, the road committee has done a fantastic job, and they've been complimented often enough, I think, for that. You know that. But this isn't like the road committee giving a report at each meeting as to where we are. This was a surprise. And that's what the problem was, is that having a public hearing is a very final portion prior to it coming to the board. And it's more important than I think it's been titled at. You need to convince yourselves that updates are in order.
Okay, that's quite a summary. Whichever of you had your hands up first.
I just want to say that it's our obligation sitting as a board member, and we usually hear what's going on a little bit in different committees. It's our obligation to ask questions. What about this? If we have this time that we get together, you got to get up and say, what about this? I hear this or I hear that. And John, I don't know which one of these road or recreation committees, will you think that was handled properly? Did you have enough notice on anything that?
The only one that I've talked about is in a full letter here.
The planning.
And that's why this has a value, because it's not a communication on your website or anything else. It's a full explanation, and it doesn't take, and I carefully write that so that it doesn't insult anybody or doesn't throw any cloud to anybody. It just says, this is what needs to be thought about and needs to be done to improve the way that we operate. And giving a notice is not an awful lot to ask for. Pardon me.
I think Lynn started it when she said that we have made the planning commission come and give a report. Maybe that's going to help to alleviate some of that stuff.
Well, and I had this on the agenda before John's letter even came out. I mean, I wanted to discuss how we should have communication with our committees. That's my focus, is how do we do that? John's term of getting an update, that's probably it in a nutshell. I mean, after all this discussion, that's probably it. Some kind of an update, some kind of a communication, staff report, some way of knowing what's going on. Because that's the whole idea. If we aren't going to be doing as much with policy governance in the operations side, we need to know what's happening. And sometimes I just look at it from a perspective of an employer. If I don't communicate with my employees, they're just going to go and do what they think, and they're going to keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing something different, something else. I have to just constantly talk to them to find out what's happening out there. And that's all I'm trying to say, is that we need to have a constant dialogue, especially if we're going to be more hands-off. And maybe the dialogue becomes the monitoring reports. Maybe that solves the whole thing. But I want to make sure, as we get into this whole new process of how we're going to do things, that we have that update, if you will, or some kind of communication with our arms. That's it.
Read the minutes.
Go ahead.
If the board decides as a whole that they would like a different form of communication from any of those committees, including the planning commission, all they need to do is say so.
That's why I
But
brought it up.
up until this point, it has been accepted that the minutes be included in the packet. As far as, I'm not asking you to take my word for the fact that these tiny homes and short-term rentals and text amendment for pedestrian access has been talked about. When I got Trustee Mark's letter, I went on a little research mission and went and looked at past minutes from past board meetings. And it's been talked in the past year, it's been talked about to the point that it has been entered into at least half a dozen planning commission minutes that have ended up in board packets. The final, apparently paramount decision that the planning commission made to have a public hearing on it shouldn't have come as a surprise to any board members. It was in the planning commission minutes for a couple meetings ago, is when it was suggested that it be put to to a public hearing. And the public hearing is simply, by the definition of the bylaws, it's just the final step that the planning commission takes before they make recommendations to the board to consider it. And that's all it is a recommendation for the board to consider an action that the planning commission is suggesting they take. There's been no decision made on it, and the supervisors served on the planning commission long enough to know that. The planning commission doesn't make any ordinances, the township board does. The planning commission just recognizes the need, and under the bylaws that they have, that they work under, they research the need, and when they're done researching, they make a recommendation to the board. And a public hearing can look as awesome as it can, I suppose, but it's nothing more than the final step before the planning commission considers what action it wants to recommend for the board. And
Well-
that's all it is.
Yeah.
And the board doesn't have to, we're having a planning commission meeting on the 13th, which is a public hearing on our text amendments that have been proposed, and if by some miracle the planning commission recommends out of that meeting that the board approve those text amendments, the board certainly, and they know that, is under no obligation to approve them. They can hold their own public hearing if they want to, if they want to get some more public input. I mean, there's any number of approaches the board can take to that once it's come out of the planning commission, and I think the board members all know that. It just, and we're not blindsiding, I don't see where the planning commission is blindsiding anybody. It's right there.
I don't think that's what you want to say.
If you want some more reporting or more detailed reporting on it, if you want a written report or a verbal staff report at every meeting, all the board has to do is ask.
I brought it up to find out what this board would like to do, because I can't just unilaterally do some of this stuff. So I would like to encourage some kind of an update, whether it's once a month. We asked, or I asked, if we could have fire and public works give us a staff report once a month. Everybody agreed to that. I'd like to expand it a little bit. And using John's word of update, I think that would have been a nice courtesy to say, hey, we're ready for the public hearing, just to give the heads up, because now you're involving the public that the board represents. So I can understand what he's saying about just getting a heads up, I think. Nobody likes to be blindsided. Nobody does.
Yes, I don't understand where that term is coming from, because, no, the heads up, because if you want to, if the board wants a different heads up than what's in the minutes, and it certainly was in the minutes that there was going to be a public hearing considered.
Okay, let me ask you this. If you're the liaison from the board to the planning commission, what do you tell the commission about us? What do you bring from us to, I don't know, maybe I've done my liaisoning differently than you. When I was on the planning commission, I came back.
What the board is working on, if there's any open issues the board is working on.
So an update would not be out of the question.
Absolutely not.
Okay.
All you gotta do is ask.
We should have had one. You were taking the next step.
And that's the only suggestion I make, and I'm not defending the planning commission, and it goes for any of the committees or commissions. All I'm suggesting is that if the board wants a different format for their updating, we'll call it that, then they need to communicate the different format that they want, because there's not a committee out there or a commission that would not just go ahead and do it. If the board wants it, that's what they get. But what has been used up until this point has been what has been accepted up until this point.
Right, so I'm asking for more verbal communication, update, whatever term you want to use, from all of our committees, whether it's the chairman or the liaison or somebody, so that we don't lose track of what's going on.
In case you haven't heard it yet, there is a public hearing on the 13th.
I'll write that down.
And before we get off this agenda item, this is where I thought we were going to talk about the updates. And the road committee is, they're on schedule. They should be done on the 15th of September. Right now, they're working on finishing slope restorations, some concrete driveways. There's very few of those that are done, like 3 or 4 that are not done. And redoing the mailboxes that need to be done. We did a punch list on last Wednesday. I went around with 2 engineers from UPEA, and we visited all the streets and all of the job sites and put together a complaint list and put it all down in writing, and most of which was kind of a long list, but most of it is items that they're currently working on that just they haven't got to yet. That'll be done over this next 2-week period. But we should be wrapped up on the 15th of September.
Pete?
Just to answer another question about board members serving on the committee, MTA agrees that you could have a township board members may serve on the committee as long as the quorum of the board is not a meeting. Often 1 or 2 board members serve on the committee to maintain contact with and act as a liaison to the township board. This is an excellent way to utilize the skills of the township trustees. So they agree that you can have up as long as you don't have a quorum.
Yeah, and they recommend that maybe the whole committee idea isn't necessary, that you just have a couple board members maybe on rec or on roads or on something else.
But to any board member who wants to sit in on these meetings on road or rec or any other, you're welcome to join at any time. You're allowed to do that. You don't feel like you can't go in there. You just walk in and sit down and listen to what's going on.
So I didn't intend that to be quite as involved as it was, but the question I'm asking is that we direct committee members, whether it's the chair or somebody, or the liaison, to give us at least monthly reports of what's going on. It could be 10 minutes, and I'd like to see them have a conversation with us. If 6 of you disagree, tell me. We can move to the next item. I just want to have a conversation.
I think that's a great idea.
Ernie?
Next.
I don't know if I should say
Let's move
anything.
on.
It may be that, I brought this up before, trying to put some kind of a project list together, that where we're at this point in time and what's been thought about coming up in the next 6 months to a year. And that some of them may never come to pass, but if you have them down there, you can start looking at it and you can cross them off if we never get to them. But have some idea what's going to happen, and that's the direction we're going, trying to go with the board in the future. And I think the committee's going to have to look at the same thing as to what's going to happen from their perspective. Pick any committee you want. There's always some people that are going to come up with some ideas, and that's something to think about. But once you think about it, we're not even going to go there. That's by the boards. So that may be something to think about. A project where we're at right now with the different items, and then what's going to happen maybe in the future.
Policy governance solution would be to have the board adopt your strategic plan, identifying for each committee what it is you want them to do, and then have them do the same report back to you that I'm going to be doing on a quarterly basis.
Yep, I just want that communication. Here's an example, real quick, because I don't want to stay on this any longer. This golf has been talked about at Schwemmwood Park for I don't know how many agendas in the rec committee. Does the board want to do that? Personally, I don't. And if somebody would have said, hey, we're talking about this, and we voted on it and said, no, don't do it, you could have eliminated a lot of talk. That's just an example, okay? If we don't know what's even being discussed, and it's discussed over and over and over and over and over, it's a waste.
Got minutes.
It's a waste of good time. That's what got me to put this on here.
Good.
I just see that we're not communicating. So, what I would like to see, I started out in the beginning, we have Public Works and Fire coming once a month. I'd like to have planning and assessing do the same, unless there's absolutely nothing to report. I mean, because we've had that with fire too. I'd like to also include planning somehow, whether Steve's not come and talk to us, you know. But we get something from the liaison, that's fine. We need to know, we need to have these updates so we can ask questions. Why are you going in this direction? Can you try something different? Whatever. We need to have those discussions. And it's Heritage Trail and the library. If you don't want to do that, tell me, and we will move on.
Are you anticipating that those reports would come from the
Somebody.
chairmans
Somebody,
or from the board reps?
whatever.
Better if it
Nice
came
to
from
talk
the
to
chair.
the chairman, but, you know, if the liaison wants to
I think the
come and have a
preference would be
conversation.
from the chair, because the board member that's a member of that committee is simply, at that point, a member of the committee. I think it could be delegated maybe to other people. The chair of the committee would be the appropriate person. And look, let's make something clear. When something comes up about an issue, let's forget, take tiny homes. Tiny homes have been talked about for 2 years, sure. But were tiny homes elevated to an active point of being put into our ordinance? No. That level was, the only time you'd read that would be if you read the minutes. And I do read the minutes. And I find them very informative. But I find things there that have reached a level of activity and action that I hadn't anticipated the board giving its go-ahead. And that's what's being asked about. And none of this is criticism of anybody.
No.
None of this is. And I keep saying we gotta be careful because we got volunteers. I don't mean the volunteers that are from the board on the committees. I'm talking about the other 3 members of 5-member committees. And we need to be respectful of their contribution. And we need to just simply communicate that what we'd like is more communication, more knowledge of things. And I don't think it's asking a whole lot to give us more alert notice of actions being taken. That's all. It's not a criticism, it's just a notice.
I think it goes back to what Lynn has been saying for quite a few months, being blindsided. And I mean, no.
They don't like that word.
Well, I know it, but nobody likes to be blindsided by anything. And I think that, John, I think you were probably blindsided by the article in the paper, and all of a sudden you went, oh, how the heck did this happen?
No, actually, I read the minutes and that goes back a ways. So I learned early on, reading the minutes, what they were doing. I just felt uncomfortable with having to read the minutes to find that things had reached another level of activity. That's all. None of this is criticism of anybody. It's just trying to find a pathway to having a better understanding of what's going on. That's all.
I just think it should taken care of in the monitoring reports, and let's move on.
That's
Because
it.
we beat this to a dead horse.
Yeah.
Well, they're not, the committees aren't part of the monitoring staff.
But,
Well,
you
but they
know,
could be.
They are now.
Well, that was my next question, is how do you want to do this?
We want the reports.
You want to do it through monitoring reports?
I think that's the way the other reports are gonna be coming, and we should probably do that.
And I think the one step that's missing here is that there hasn't been any direction from the board what you want the committees to be working on.
That's right. That's
And,
another
for them to work on it. Well, but that's your strategic agenda that you have to adopt.
Annual plan of work, yeah.
Your annual plan of work and what you want done with Schwamwood, what you want done at Lions Field from the recreation standpoint, how you want the roads to be maintained, and then anything aside from that needs to come to you to be vetted before it gets pursued.
Or it gets pursued?
Yeah.
That's the operative.
So the recreation committee would have come to you and said, it's not on your agenda, but we've had a proposal for disc golf, what do you think? And you could then either say yes or no, and then they go off and do what they're gonna do. Road committee comes to you and says, yeah, we did a great job on the roads, but this intersection is below grade, we need to raise it, what do you wanna do? Do you wanna go forward, do you wanna leave it as is? I mean, those are the kinds of things I think that you're talking about, but you need to remember back we had the strategic agenda up on the wall and we had Lions Field, we're doing this, and this. These are the things we're doing. And then we kept reporting back to you what the status of those items were. And I think that's where you need to be to get to where you're talking about being with your committees. I don't think you want to charge your committees with having to come to every meeting of yours, to give reports. I think what you want to do is you want to give them the direction. These are the things that we want you to pursue, and here's your budget to do it. And then have the reports come back in terms of what the progress is. There may not be any progress for a number of reasons, but you need to know that so you can respond to your people out there, the residents.
Some of the ideas come from the committee.
They do.
The point is, if we tell the committees what we'd like them to be working on, it's the absence of having told them about things that they come up with on their own.
It's the same thing you do
They
from...
know that they,
But it hasn't been operating like that, John.
Right.
over the
I know,
past years.
I know.
But it's the same
That's what
process.
you're saying.
It's the same process that I follow. I come to you with a list of objectives for 2018, and off of that list, you select which objectives you want me to pursue, and then that's my roadmap. If something else comes up, I have to bring it to you and say, this isn't going to work this year, how about we do this? And, and it's up to you.
Giving us updates too,
But that's,
so we
I
have
mean...
a conversation.
Right, but see, then I have direction in terms of what it is you want me to be working on in addition to just the regular daily stuff. The committees don't have that from you. So what they're doing is they're out talking with other things, and then you see in the minutes, we've talked about this, but you've not had any real report about what the rationale is, what the potential cost is, who's involved, those kinds of things.
Okay,
Move on.
let me work on that. I don't know where we are. That was the
Number-
staff
we're
reports
number
discussion.
three.
Number
Yeah.
9.4.
And,
We don't have-
3 and 4, we're not gonna do anything with, thank heaven. Yes. Go ahead.
The appendix A reporting. I mean, I would assume that the board is gonna wait for the manager to present the format for those reports.
Mhm.
And there is
We're
a
gonna- Then we're
policy
gonna say,
governance.
yeah,
form
that's
for that.
really nice, or no, that really is bad. We
Yep.
want
Right.
to change it.
Yes, and there's a training session coming
Do
up.
I also assume that when the format for those reports is finalized, that would also be the format for the committee and commission?
I would hope
That's
so.
what I was just thinking, that's what I just wrote down.
You was
Makes
doing
sense.
right.
Good observation.
Wasn't a hard question.
So 3 and 4 will be on there at some point later. Public comment.
And that's what your discussion was about potentially January 1st.
Yes. Meeting wrap-up. Any announcements? Anybody wants to share? Ernie?
I have one. September 15th,
Hmm.
Tax Day. Just kind of a forewarning that you're welcome to pay prior to it. If you pay after that, we'll be more than happy to give you a penalty of 1% in that. So 15th of September is the day to pay your taxes in that.
Thanks, Ernie.
Figured that would be a good one to end up with.
especially after that discussion. Any more announcements?
Yeah, from the clerk's office, you have till 4 o'clock on October 10th to register for the November 7th election. So, especially with the college students moving in here, make sure if you haven't changed your address for voting, get in here by October 10th, because if you're here after that, you have to vote where you were previously registered, and there's nothing I can do about it. And Saturday, November 4th, from noon to 2, the clerk will be in the office for the absentee ballot, give and take. So, and November 7th will be the election. So that's anything. And also, too, any persons interested in being an election inspector, contact either myself or Lois. There's going to be a class sometime this month. You have to be certified to work. So if you're interested, talk to me and we'll get that session set up at the county clerk.
I was gonna say, I thought I saw a hand. Dave?
September 15th is an interesting number because that's when the road project should be finished after its 3 years. Which will follow after that is the development of a punch list of unacceptable items that have to be fixed. So the residents, I know I sat here and complain about them, but the residents need to make sure that if they have issues that they want to talk to somebody about, that they need to get them in so that we can talk about them before everybody packs up their toys and goes home, because after that it's going to be freezing and snow outside and it's going to be too late.
Okay. Pete?
This will fall into our last discussion about finding out what's going on ahead of time, so I just want to let you know that November 28th, we're going to have a tree lighting in the Westwood Mall. Mark your calendar.
That's great. Good announcement.
What's the weather gonna be like, Pete?
In the 30s.
Maybe.
That's it on announcement? Okay.
Just one last. Also September 15th, everybody who's out biking, hiking, walking, bird season opens September 15th, so the hunters will also be out in the field, and they can hunt in the township. So be aware for conflicts, wear your orange.
Good one, too. Okay.
Also on September 15th is my wife's birthday.
You be
Since
good.
we all got something on September 15th.
Do we need to call and remind you?
No. Bird season does that.
And Darcy got married Saturday.
And a report, I haven't seen a bear in 6 weeks
Good.
That's good.
in my yard.
Review, I heard that. Review of motions passed. Do we have any motions
Yeah,
conducted?
motions passed this evening were to pass the consent agenda as amended, pass the regular agenda, pass the policy governance manual. It was a roll call vote. It was passed 7-0. Action item for the supervisor is to get the letter out to the road commission. And that's all the motions and actions of tonight's meeting.
Excellent.
Move to adjourn.
Anything? No, we're not finished. Anything that we need to plan for future meetings in October? Anything that
Um,
anybody knows of? Yes.
One thing I don't like about this item is tabled items, because tabled items you're really not supposed to take out of the current meeting. So I would really like to get rid of that
Yeah, I agree with that.
that item, because it's not the correct term, and
Yeah.
anything that we would,
Lacing or something.
yeah, anything we would like table, we would actually make a motion
Deferred,
to
maybe.
defer it to the next meeting, so I want that out.
Do you want to change it to deferred or just leave it out?
It could be deferred items. That would be more appropriate.
Okay?
That fits.
And
That's
items
all I
planned
have.
for future meetings. So as of right now, we don't have anything for the next agenda that's pressing.
And the manager might come up with this, but I think we have to look at our calendar for our budget work session.
Yes, yeah.
But you probably don't have anything for now that we could talk about, right, date-wise?
Well, it's up to the board members. You'll have your preliminary budget presented to you by the 29th of this month, so it's up to the board members when you're available for your budget sessions. So you just need to consult your calendars and.
That'd be an agenda item. Budget work sessions.
Okay. It's always got something. Go ahead.
Do we have the form developed that you fill out for an agenda item?
Yep, you can use the one in the book. Since we approved this, you
That's a
can
good
use it.
one.
You can either, we were talking about that today, we can either leave them in the office and y'all can pick them up when you come in, or you can just print it from your book, or we can, however you want to do it.
Couple items I think we need to get included on some agendas in the near future are asset management programs across the board and where we're going with those. And the other one is the water program and where we're going with that as far as,
That would be included water.
no, as far as going out 492 and what our plans are there with our well fields.
Well, phase.
We need to get that phase broken down so that the guy on the street can understand it, which would be me. And so that we can have some discussion about it, because our contract is coming up sooner rather than later with the city, and I think we need to be prepared for that.
Be a future water project discussion.
Yep.
And that's correct, because this is where we put the items where we are gonna look at for October, so we can put those.
So,
My question is, do I need to include them on a form and turn them into?
No, not here, because you've stated it here, and I've wrote them down, and we'll figure that into October's agenda.
These are things I figure out after I leave?
Yeah, anything like you have a concern about in between meetings that we didn't talk about here, you would use that form to get it on the agenda.
put it in one of our mailboxes, doesn't matter. So on September 29th, when we have the budget, we can bring our, well, that would be the October meeting then, bring our calendars to the first October meeting for scheduling.
You could actually remember your next meeting on the 19th.
You think so?
Yeah, you can schedule them in October and November, but you should probably do that at your next meeting.
Okay, so you did add that to budget.
Yeah, budget work sessions.
The hardest part about this new agenda is gonna be trying to figure out where to put stuff. I had to call Susan twice to find out what stuff was, what it fell under.
Well, even if we get it wrong, it won't kill anything.
No, not at all. Okay, so asset management, the water project of 492, and the budget work session date scheduling. Right? Okay. Okay, now board member comment. So if there's something you want to share or comment, go ahead, Ernie.
I would like to suggest somehow the manager report be put in here where the manager actually, like he has in the past, gone through his report. Because there's always some things in there that I'm sure the residents are interested in that. Like this one is the ambulance transportation, where we're at on that. We've already talked about the roads that took care of that. The offices now are from 8 to 5 again, bringing up items like this here, like he has done in the past. It brings out,
That affects the residents more.
right, the residents then know what's going on in that too. So that's.
Well, we
so-
can always move that into the announcements.
However we want to do, I just think it's worthwhile to go through that so the residents have an idea of what's going on in that.
Not all of them will get on and get the packet, I suppose. I mean, we assume that they all get the same information we do, but they might just go to YouTube, watch it, and shut it off. Okay.
Right, so it's just one of those things to reinforce what's happening here.
That's a good idea. Anything else from board member comment?
Oh, I'm happy.
Oh, good.
A move to adjourn.
Second.
Motion and support, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. 8:58.